How's it going, everybody? Cameron here with Canadian Gamer coming at you with another video. It's been a hot New York minute since I put out a video. Seeing as we are getting a little bit closer to Halloween, I thought we'd get a little bit festive here. Beer of the day, Heineken in Ontario. As I mentioned before, we can now buy beer and wine at your local convenience store. So it does make things a lot more convenient. That being said, the alcohol, the selection is not as good at the convenience store as compared to if you went to an actual, what we have in Ontario is called LCBO, a huge store that's devoted to booze, or the beer store. But it does the trick when you're in a pinch, walking distance. So, a couple of things I want to talk about today. Still haven't dug out the good camera. I said I was going to switch things up and try to improve my production values, but I've just been, the combination, I've been busy and lazy as well. Yeah, there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about. The first thing I wanted to talk about was Starfield, Shattered Space, the DLC that came out a couple of weeks ago, maybe even a month ago. I did get into it. I've been playing it the last couple of nights. I'm about an hour and a half into it. I'm really enjoying it. I'm not going to talk too much about it here, but it takes place on a brand new planet. And the DLC is better than the base game. I have no problems with the base game. I really enjoyed it. But the DLC, the chef's kiss, let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen. Oh my God. Everything. The graphics, the story, the sound, the audio, the music. It's awesome. I haven't played around too much with the new vehicle that you can use in the game. A little bit. But for the DLC, I don't know. I'm not too far into it yet, but it seems like it takes place, like I said, in a city on a planet, and there's not really, from what I see, an opportunity to use the vehicle in that area. So we'll see. The next thing I want to talk about quickly is my favorite Halloween movie of all time. It's tough, it's really tough. There's a lot of good ones out there. I would still say probably the original Halloween movie, directed by John Carpenter, is probably my number one. But a close number one, I guess a definite second, would be Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. Talked about it before on the channel. This movie is awesome. Megadan29 hates this movie for some reason. I don't know why. But man, this is a really misunderstood movie. A lot of people out there have either seen the movie and they just don't like that it's an alternate universe and it has nothing to do with the Halloween franchise as most of us know it, or have not seen the movie and just think it looks like a bad movie. But no, it's a really good movie. Awesome. Really good. Oh. The next thing I want to talk about here is the new Analogue system that is being released. You can order it now. I don't know how much it is Canadian. $400. $350, $400. The Analogue 3D. So the Analogue 3D, for those of you who don't know what Analogue is a company that produces FPGA video game consoles, basically allowing you to run games emulated through the hardware instead of the software. Now I have right here the Analogue Pocket. It's pretty good. I don't use it as much as I probably should. It's probably It's probably about as far as I'm going to go with Analogue. The TurboGrafx 16 analog console that came out piques my interest as well. But I think as far as TurboGrafx 16 is concerned, I think I'd rather just have the OG original console and just get an EverDrive. Take a sip of my drink here. Parched. So Analogue's released several of these consoles over the years. They started out with the Analogue NT, which was an FPGA console based on the original Nintendo. Then there was a Super NT, which could play Super Nintendo games. Again, hooking these consoles up to a modern TV. And the Sega Genesis as well. And now we're getting the Analogue, aptly named 3D, which is their take on the Nintendo 64. So this is like where I draw the line. This is the line in the sand. So I wasn't crazy to begin with. The idea of playing Super Nintendo games or Sega Genesis games upscaled, on a 1080p resolution on a modern TV. No matter how sharp it is or what filters you're able to put onto the games through the console, it's just not for me. I'd rather play, as an example, in my Genesis room, play the original carts on original hardware using a CRT. I know that's not for everybody. I know that's not an option for everybody, but it is for me. However, with regards to the Nintendo 64, and this is coming from someone who lived in that era, I don't want to say that the Nintendo 64 is a bad console. I want to tread lightly here. I don't want to piss too many people off, but it's a console that does not have the greatest library. It's got a weak library of games. Back in the day, it was like we were getting breadcrumbs as far as new releases were concerned. Because of the cartridge-based format, a lot of the developers at that time, for cost reasons, it made more sense to just release games on the PlayStation 1 versus the N64. So the N64 unfortunately suffered. Its biggest Achilles heel was the fact that it was a cartridge-based console at a time when the industry was moving away from that format to DVD and CD-ROM. So there are good games. There are good games for the Nintendo 64, but not many. Not many. If I'm being honest with myself, I could say there's probably 15, 20 good games on that console. At least for me personally. About 15, 20 good games. Funny enough, one game that doesn't get talked about enough is Extreme G. I used to have that for the Nintendo 64. Extreme G, Extreme G2, and MR2 Racing. Those were some good games. I digress. The Nintendo 64 has a weak ass library of games compared to the PS1. It does. And the problem with the Nintendo 64 is, again, you wouldn't understand unless you were there. In period, the graphics actually looked pretty cool. There was no pixelation. Everything looked much better for the most part versus a PS1 game or a Sega Saturn game, obviously. But now we can look back at that era all these years later. And the N64, the games have not aged well at all. They have not. Because we've come so far from that era. And now we can really pick the hardware apart as far as what was, as far as technology is concerned, what was pushing these games. And you look at a lot of these N64 games and like the textures are really blurry. To the point where it's like the PS1, in my opinion, even with the pixelation, it's more appealing to look at than the blurry textures on the N64. Everything was so goddamn blurry. One game that sticks out to me would probably be, Mario 64, obviously. Zelda, Ocarina of Time, whether you think that's the greatest game ever or not, doesn't really hold up. We're just talking about the graphics here, not talking about the gameplay. And all the other games too, for the most part, extremely blurry. muddy. Just doesn't really look that good. The only saving grace for the Nintendo 64 is if you're able to have an original 64 and you've got it hooked up to a CRT. The CRT sort of masks the inherent, I don't know if that's the word, the flaws of those games, and you can still get away with enjoying those old games on a CRT. It doesn't look too bad. It's only when, and we're not even talking about the analog console at the moment, it's only when you take an N64 game, because a lot of them have been re-released on modern consoles, even the Xbox One. It's only when you start to upscale those games and play them on a modern TV that a lot of the flaws in those games are amplified. And you can really see it. Once you dial up the resolution and everything on those games, it looks worse. It looks worse. Much like the original PlayStation, a lot of those older games, they look better on a CRT because the CRT at that low resolution, it sort of masks a lot of the flaws. Whereas when you take away the CRT aspect of it and try playing a PS1 game on a backwards compatible PS3 on a modern TV. It looks like fucking ass. Oh my god. It's brutal. It's bad enough when I play my PS1 and my PS2 games on my JVC Plasma over here. It's an older Plasma. It still looks pretty good, but it doesn't look as good as a CRT. Everything's off about it. The lighting, the color, the warmth that you get from a CRT, everything. So with the Analogue 3D, that's where I draw the line in the sand, because now you're selling a console that's going to be, hooked up to a modern TV, a 4K TV. I think it's got 4K capabilities this time around. And you're going to be playing N64 games upscaled at 4K on a modern TV. No, I don't think so. I really don't think there's nothing you can do to enhance the image quality of an N64 game. It's impossible. You are just going to end up making it look worse. So that's why I give the NES, the Super Nintendo, and the Sega Genesis a little bit of a free pass in that regards, because most of those games, not all, but most of them were 2D sprite-oriented games. But once you take the leap from 2D to 3D, and you're dealing with all these warped, blurry textures and the poor frame rate of the N64, a lot of those games ran like shit. Even GoldenEye, you look at that now, Turok, all those games just look so awful. I have a hard time believing, paying whatever it is, $300, $400 Canadian for this console to upscale these games. I have a hard time believing it's going to make these games look better. Just the opposite. It's going to, like I said, shine a big, bright spotlight on what is already bad about these games, and it's going to make it look worse. Whereas if you took these games, like I said, and played them on an old CRT, these old N64 games could get a little bit of a pass, because at least you're playing it on a TV that was meant for that hardware. Like I said, a lot of these modern TVs and these gizmos that you buy for these retro consoles, you think you're doing yourself a service, but you're actually not. You'd be further ahead just to buy a real N64. Games aren't too expensive. People are giving CRTs away for free. You would get a much better experience that way than trying to be an elitist, plopping down a bunch of money on an Analogue 3D and hooking that up to a modern TV. I cannot get behind that. No way. Interestingly enough, though, the hardware, at least in my eyes, it looks almost too similar in shape to the N64, to the point where I'd be shocked if Nintendo didn't step in with a lawsuit, to be honest with you. So, yeah, we'll see. I don't know. I'm not going to buy it. The N64 just doesn't have a good enough library of games for me to warrant picking that up. That's just my honest opinion on it. If I bought an N64, I used to own one back in the day, but if I bought one, the only games I would want for it would be Doom 64, Quake, Quake 2, a couple of the other FPSs. Duke Nukem 64 is kind of interesting. Maybe Cruisin' World. Maybe a couple of the wrestling games. But that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it for me. So that's it. Just a short video. Just wanted to rant about the Analogue 3D. Wanted to talk about my favorite Halloween movie. Don't have much else to talk about. Wanted to put out a video. Haven't put out anything in a while. But I'm really just chipping away at the DLC Shattered Space for Starfield. Having a really good time with it, folks. So yeah, hopefully I'll put out another video before Halloween. But that's it. That's it for now. What are your thoughts on the Analogue 3D console? And what is your favorite Halloween movie? Leave it in the comments below. Anyways, guys, that's going to do it for this video. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good night.